So if you're importing goods from Turkey, you've almost certainly seen the term EXW, or Ex-Works. And on the surface, it looks great, right? It seems like the simplest, most direct deal you could possibly get. But what if that so-called simplicity is actually hiding a pretty serious risk? Today, we are going to pull back the curtain on why the EXW deal you think you're getting in Turkey probably isn't what's happening at all, and more importantly, what that could mean for your business.
And yeah, this is really the heart of the matter. We all love a simple, cheap deal. But when you're talking about international shipping, even a tiny misunderstanding can spiral into massive headaches, lost money, and can even wreck a great business relationship. So, is EXW really the easy button it looks like, or is it kind of like a trap waiting for you? Okay, so first things first, before we dive into the whole Turkish situation, let's just get on the same page. We need to understand what Ex-Works is supposed to mean according to the official global rulebook.
Right. So according to Incoterms, which is basically the dictionary for world trade, EXW is the term that puts the absolute maximum amount of responsibility on you, the buyer. The seller has the minimum responsibility. All they have to do is get your stuff ready for you to pick up. That's it. That's the official promise.
And when I say minimum responsibility, I really mean it. The seller's one and only job is to have your order packed up and sitting there, ready to go. As you can see, that's literally it. Their part of the deal is officially over.
Which of course means that everything else now falls squarely on your shoulders. You're the one responsible for loading it onto the truck. You have to arrange all the transport. You have to deal with Turkish export customs, create all the documents. And here's the kicker. You take on all the risk the second those goods are available at the factory door.
Okay, so that's the textbook definition. That's the theory. But we all know theory and reality can be two very different things. So now let's look at what actually happens on the ground in Turkey. And this is where it gets really, really interesting. On the left, you've got the official rules we just went over. But look at the right. That's what's actually happening in Turkey. Even when your contract says EXW, the seller is almost always the one loading the truck, managing the export customs, often arranging the transport to the port, and creating all the key documents. It's a completely different ballgame in practice. So what this all boils down to is a huge disconnect. Your contract says one thing, XEW, but the way everyone is actually working looks way more like a totally different Incoterm, FCA, or free carrier. And that mismatch between paper and practice, well, that's where the danger is hiding.
So the obvious next question is, why? Why don't they just do what the contract says? Well, it turns out there are some very powerful legal, financial, and just plain practical reasons for why things are done this way.
It really comes down to these three main drivers: Turkish export law itself, some pretty big tax risks for the seller, and frankly, their basic need to control their own operation. Let's break each one down. And here it is. This is the absolute game changer. It's simple. Turkish law says that the official exporter of record has to be a Turkish company. A foreign buyer, like you, simply cannot legally file the export paperwork. This one rule makes a by-the-book EXW shipment pretty much impossible from the get-go. And right on top of that, there's a huge pile of money involved. You see, for a Turkish seller to get their VAT exemption on an export, they have to prove the goods actually left the country. And the only way they can guarantee they get that official proof is if they handle the export declaration themselves. There's no way they're going to risk losing that tax break by leaving it in your hands. And finally, there's a reason that's just, well, it's just common sense. Think about it. Your supplier has worked really hard to produce your order. The absolute last thing they want is some random third-party truck driver showing up and damaging their product while trying to load it. Of course, they want their own experienced team to handle it. It protects their goods and their relationship with you. So we've got this weird situation, right? The seller is doing all this extra work for legal and practical reasons. But this creates a giant hidden contradiction in your agreement. And it all comes down to one critical, scary question. If something goes wrong, who's on the hook? And this is the ticking time bomb right at the center of the problem. The seller's team is physically doing the work, loading the truck, but your EXW contract says that all the risk for any damage transferred to you before they even started loading. You see the massive disconnect here? It's a legal trap. Let's just walk through how this nightmare scenario plays out. Imagine the seller's forklift operator has a bad day and drops a whole pallet of your goods. No problem, you think. I'll file an insurance claim. But your insurance company takes one look at that EXW contract and says, sorry, according to this paperwork, that was your risk before the pallet was even lifted. Claim denied. Now you're stuck in a nasty dispute, and a great supplier relationship is probably ruined.
Okay, deep breaths. The good news is there is a super simple, super smart way to avoid this entire mess. And it's all about just choosing the right term that matches what's actually happening in the real world.
And that term is FCA, or free carrier. Under FCA, the seller is officially responsible for two things: clearing the goods for export and loading them onto the truck you sent. And crucially, the risk transfers to you after the goods are safely loaded. Now, doesn't that sound exactly like what's already happening anyway? I mean, this chart just says it all, doesn't it? Look, you're not actually changing how things get done. In both cases, the seller is handling customs and loading. The only thing you're changing is the clarity and the legal standing. With FCA, the risk transfers at the right, logical moment. You're just making the paperwork match reality. So just by making that simple switch to FCA, you fix everything. Suddenly, your contract correctly shows the seller's legal duties, the risks transfers when it's supposed to, your insurance coverage actually works, and maybe most importantly, you and your supplier have a clear, honest agreement where there's no room for confusion. So let's just bring it all home. That EXW term that looks so easy and so simple on the price list, it's actually the one that causes the most arguments, the most confusion, and the most problems for anyone exporting from Turkey. It creates a contract that's just totally out of sync with the law and the real world. And that really leaves us with one last thing to think about. We all tend to chase what looks simple on the surface. But as we've just seen, that can hide some deep, costly complications. So the question you should be asking yourself is this: in the complex world of global trade, isn't real, honest-to-goodness clarity way more valuable than just the idea of simplicity?